Advantage easy acquired.
In the run-up to the 20th anniversary of Half-Life 2, I've been falling in love all over again with the series that changed gaming for me and countless others forever. I quite often go through these fervent cycles of Half-Life obsession, and each time, I'm always pleasantly surprised to find players who've been eternally launching toilets and radiators into each other's faces in the same familiar maps. These last holdouts of an oft-forgotten game keep a huge part of my childhood alive to this day. Released just 2 weeks after Half-Life 2, Half-Life 2 Deathmatch was initially a fairly bare-bones experience, all things considered. There were only 2 maps at launch, Lockdown and Overwatch, hastily cobbled together from the Half-Life 2 campaign. Not even the crowbar, stun stick or slam mines were present, the latter being a staple of Half-Life 1's deathmatch mode. It was typical of games in this era to have relatively fleshed out multiplayer components, and even this early on, Valve was no stranger to online play with Half-Life Deathmatch, Dave Defeat, Team Fortress Classic and Counter-Strike already under its belt. But as the world drew ever nearer to the release of Half-Life 2 and the hype train fully inbound for City 17, Gabe Newell set the stage for what to expect with Source Engine-powered multiplayer at E3 2004.
My name is Gabe Newell. I'm the Managing Director at Valve, and I'm going to show you Half-Life 2, as well as give you an idea of what we're doing with multiplayer. I'll give you a quick demonstration of Counter-Strike running on Source. Enemy spotted.
The absence of a Half-Life 2 multiplayer mode and running with Counter-Strike Source is telling in hindsight, and at the time, it gave the impression that Half-Life 2 Deathmatch wasn't exactly a priority. In the recently released Half-Life 2 20th anniversary documentary, developer Adrian Finnell suggests it was more of a happy accident that Half-Life 2 Deathmatch came to be, and it clearly wasn't ready for the prime time. Not yet anyway. This is understandable though when you take into consideration Half-Life 2's development, a process that Valve itself has described as arduous. But as the dust settled after Half-Life 2's launch and the colourful arguments about Steam being a requirement quietened down, things quickly began to gather apace, with players drawn to the then novel physics found in the Source engine. Unconstrained from the more linear limits of Half-Life 2's campaign, Half-Life 2 Deathmatch afforded players the ability to use the seminal gravity gun in a competitive multiplayer setting, the gaming equivalent of peanut butter and jam. It was the first true sense of a Source engine sandbox before Gary's mod came into its own, with oodles of custom game modes and maps enabled by the Source SDK that released alongside it. Unfortunately, many of these have since been lost to time, and though while I was aware of them back in the day, my thoroughly anemic countryside internet connection prevented me from trying them out. Nevertheless, I have many vivid, cherished memories of playing Half-Life 2 Deathmatch with my older brother. This yearning for the past is quite often what kickstarts my forays into games of yore, but unlike that family holiday or opening that present on that birthday, most of the pieces are still in place. It is a strange thing to seek the past and find exactly how you left it. You don't find this in the real world. Places decay, trees grow taller, buildings are built, sands shift, yet Half-Life 2 Deathmatch just is. Experiencing it on a CRT monitor, as God intended, is even more surreal. It truly is a time machine to simpler days. And though while there are still few mods and the like, what draws me is a small dedicated core player base who play the game in the same now iconic maps in its almost original form. Hearing the constant thrum of gravity guns is like going back into the womb and hearing your mother's heartbeat. Well, maybe. I want to thank those players who keep the dream alive, many of whom I suspect are just like me, A special mention goes to those keeping the Sanctuary servers alive. My brother and I loved to play on these back in the day, and it's utterly surreal to still hear the cult's She Sells Sanctuary ring out upon connecting. I will truly mourn the day these servers are no longer with us, and this anniversary update gave me a bit of a heart attack because it kind of broke the old servers, and for a moment I did think they were gone, but they're still with us. I also want to take a moment to thank these old players for putting up with my leaderboard topping shenanigans as my neurons formed in the primordial gloop of BSP maps begin to stir and take over as if I'm some sort of source engine sleeper agent. Within minutes, I am catching grenades and energy cores and returning them in kind to sender in familiar locales such as Lockdown, Overwatch, or my personal favourite, Rundown. Stringing together a chain of gravity gun kills brings a joy like no other, and jousting props with another grav-gun connoisseur is still such a unique experience all these years later. But if the gravity gun is my brush, every piece of art needs its canvas. Though much has been said about empty multiplayer maps being unsettling in their liminality, I really love soaking up the atmosphere in Half-Life 2 Deathmatch's maps. The ambient vibes are off the charts. I could literally stay in these maps for hours, but I'm only going to subject you to a little bit of it. Skip ahead if this flavour of special interest is a bit too much for you.
Evidence of uncivil activity in this community. Code. Assemble. Plan. Contain. Attention protection team. Static invasion progress in this community.
As I touched upon earlier, Overwatch and Lockdown act almost as vignettes of moments found in Half-Life 2's campaign. But in Resistance's case, it's a curious mashup of Ravenholm and Nova Prospect. As a child, and even now, I couldn't help but wonder where these locations existed and how they fitted into the Half-Life narrative. Was this a battle taking place during the Uprising? Was it in Ravenholm? Where were we? These questions may never be answered, and perhaps they shouldn't. But what I did discover years later is that Resistance is a remake of a custom map, Bodies, made by Jonathan Linker for Monolith Productions' 1997 game Blood. Half-Life historian Marfitimus Blackamus has an excellent side-by-side detailing this. It's really trippy to see, and after all these years, it really somehow affected me on a deep level. While I try and not make a habit of overwriting childhood wonder with stone-cold facts, a question whose answer sorely evaded me for a long time was what the name of a certain custom Half-Life 2 Deathmatch map was. Fortunately, there are those who are just as valve-pilled as I, and after a fruitless search on my part where I trawled the internet looking for the hallowed floating island map that I saw when I closed my eyes, a kind soul in Reddit rediscovered DM Avalon for me. Created by Michael Visser, also known as 3D Mike, for a Half-Life 2 Deathmatch mapping contest, I loved playing this map on the official PC Zone server in 2005 when I was but a wee lad, and it has lived in my head ever since. As an initiate of Unreal Tournament 2004, I loved the verticality of this map. But what really stood out to me was its ethereal beauty. It felt truly otherworldly, like a place you would visit in your dreams. And though it was the scene of countless frags, it had a strange, calming aura for me. It was also one of my earliest introductions to just what could be created with the Half-Life 2 assets, an itch that would be thoroughly scratched in thousands of hours to come in Gary's mod. And as such, its haunting charms were etched into my 9-year-old grey matter, but clearly not deep enough to remember its name. Unfortunately for 3D Mike, it did not win the Half-Life 2 Deathmatch mapping contest, but it was an honourable mention, with the winner being DM Underpass from Scott M. Jordan, and the aforementioned DM Resistance from Jonathan Linker, and DM Powerhouse from Michael Schulz being runners-up. It's amazing to see just how foundational modding was, and to a certain extent still is to Valve. For years I was none the wiser that many of the maps I spent countless hours on came from the community. My big brother and I took stabs at creating our own maps, but we knew nothing of weapon placement, spawn points, or really map design at all. We were in awe of what these creators could do. It was true sorcery. Sadly, a lot of these older maps won't work anymore, as Valve broke Half-Life 2 Deathmatch multiple times by upgrading the engine to the Orange Box version, and then the 2013 Source SDK. This also got rid of prop flying and duck sprinting, which were cornerstones of competitive play back in the day. Perhaps the biggest crime of all, though, was the introduction of those ugly blood particles that came along with the Orange Box, something I have cursed since 2007. Incredibly, for the 20th anniversary patch, Valve has offered players the option to revert back to the old blood particles as well as the fire effects found in the 2004 version. These haven't quite made it to Half-Life 2 Deathmatch, but I'm sure they will. Even so, though I can't quite revisit the past just as it was, no matter how dearly I yearn to be back in 2005, reliving all with my big brother, there are around 200 or so players a day keeping the dream alive with one tossed toilet at a time. Even if things have changed a little, these are the streets I cut my teeth on, and I can still walk down them anytime I like. What a privilege. And while there are a handful of saddos like me that keep the flame alive just enough so that we can go down memory lane, fumbled updates that broke competitive play, pushed players away, as well as the fact that Valve were cooking up something quite special. Thank you so much for watching and listening to my inane nostalgic ramblings. If you enjoyed the video, please do give it a like and consider subscribing, as it will really help out the channel. This has been the very first video I've made for my own personal YouTube channel, and if you want to be notified if I ever make another one, click that bell icon, and if I do make it, I'll see you in the next one. This has been Machine Yearning, thanks for watching, cheers.